2020 podcast numbers and projections have not only been affected by the coronavirus, but by the upcoming presidential election as well. These two major events have touched and affected almost every industry in a multitude of ways. In this episode of On the Mic with Ad Results Media, Nathan Spell and I sit down with Larry Goldberg of Cadence 13 to discuss the changes he's experienced in 2020. So let's get started.
That's the great thing about Stamps.com. They grow with you.
As much fun as I had, I couldn't wait to get back to my Sleep Number bed.
Yep.
I love my Third Love bras. They're hands down the most comfortable bras I've ever owned.
I love making Blue Apron. I love it. It's my me time.
Well, Larry, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us. I know that there's a lot going on and it can be difficult to find time in your schedules, so we really appreciate you being here. Would you mind starting off by telling our listeners a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Nathan, for having me. And I feel sort of honored to be invited onto the Ad Results podcast. It's Larry Goldberg. I work with Cadence 13. I've been there since August of 17, so it'll be 3 years this summer. Before that, I've spent time in radio, national radio, local spot for Clear Channel iHeart and ABC radio before that. I shifted over to Cumulus and worked at Westwood One, so I did network radio. I was on a meeting one time and someone asked me about the digital platform we had at Westwood One, and this was in spring of 17, and I sort of gave the old Charlie Brown wah, 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 and decided I came home that night and told my wife, I've got to go make a move over to digital audio, whether it was Pandora, Spotify, but I really had an inkling for podcasting. I had always been a podcast listener. I find it to be talk radio on steroids, so to speak. We make the analogy in the office, a couple of my colleagues and myself when we were in the office, that, listening to music, you're leaning back, you're hanging out. And when you're listening to talk radio, you're sort of sitting up, paying attention. With podcasting, you're sort of leaning in, right? And you're taking it to another level. So it was a natural fit, natural progression for me. And, I love it. I love dealing directly with the clients. I love the direct response or the performance enhancing clients that I get to work with. And, that's my story.
That's awesome. How have things changed at Cadence 13 since the start of this pandemic?
Aside from the obvious working from home?
Of course, that, yeah.
It's interesting. I think end of March, it was sort of a wait and see approach. Like the rest of the ad community, we fielded a lot of challenging client cancellations, revisions, changes, obviously because nobody knew where the world was going. But from a content standpoint, we continued to beef up our schedule and produce content. Brene Brown was set to launch at South by Southwest, which was the week of 3/16, which is basically the start of the pandemic. We bumped it back 1 week, and she's had over 1 million downloads in her first 15 episodes every episode. So while a lot is different from a where we are standpoint, physically, I think our attitude is 100% back, and our content is in line with where it needs to be. We're just hoping that the ad community can, be receptive to that and come back in full force.
So let's talk more about content. How exactly has content pivoted with everything that's been going on with the pandemic?
Well, I think from a listener standpoint, obviously there's no sports anymore or lack of sports, but there are still shows that talk about sports like GM Shuffle. They just talk about sports and football, how it relates to COVID-19 or how it relates to the draft, which was huge for us. And we did draft specials, and Mike Lombardi was out in Las Vegas doing 4 shows that week versus his normal 1 show a week. So from a standpoint of content, the Crooked Media guys are now just covering coronavirus, how it relates to politics and how it relates to elections. On the flip side, we had shows like Girl Boss and Skim that have had to cut back, less ad space being sold in those shows, other, let's say, platforms that those, publishers work with, whether it be their search or their online or their social, not receiving the ad revenue that they normally receive, and those sort of slowing down their business. So we've pivoted in a sense to create new content. Andrew Yang, Brene Brown, among others. Crooked came out with one called Hall of Shame, where they're doing sports stories from a political standpoint. But I think we've managed the process as well as we could.
It's the end of May now as we're recording this podcast. How has inventory changed since, January and February, both in terms of, supply, obviously, but maybe demand from the advertiser side?
From March through June, inventory took a hit. We are normally, as a company, 85 to 90% sold out in shows, and some shows were floundering to the 30 to 40% range. There are certain shows like Happier with Gretchen Rubin who didn't miss a beat. So certain content shows survived, certain ones didn't. But overall, I would say as a company, we definitely took a hit in inventory, but it afforded us the opportunity, from an ad results perspective, to actually, beef up some of those client schedules, bonus some clients, discount some pricing for some short-term deals if we needed to, and look at that sort of challenge with a different type of solution.
So what are y'all doing to stay on top of trends and changes in the space?
I love the way you say y'all. Can you just keep doing that? Every time I talk to somebody from Houston and they use the y'all, I love it. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was asking what y'all are doing to stay on top of trends.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. We kind of listen to the marketplace. It's not just the audience, but it's the clients as well. We need to understand the crossover needs are, the means that what listeners are looking for and where those tie into what advertisers are looking for. In a sense of certain programming like Ramble, Emma Chamberlain and David Dobrik, and some of our YouTube social influencers, they're thriving. They're winning Webby Awards, and that helped us land Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio, which will be coming out in August, September range. So, we hear what the marketplace is saying. We understand, one of the other things I love about podcasting is, there's no more CHR and classic rock and AC. We've got the ability to do storytelling against the rules with Michael Lewis from Pushkin. And we've got Malcolm Gladwell's new season coming out in June from Revisionist History. So there's true crime now, there's storytelling, and then there's also these social influencers. So having these types of people like Malcolm Gladwell and Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio and David Dobrik winning awards, it just bolsters our roster. Brene Brown, I saw her this morning on the Today Show doing commencement speeches for graduation. So it's not just that we've got these little small shows, we've got these big name personalities.
So if you don't mind talking about it a little bit, what would you say your biggest challenge to your specific role has been?
Me personally, Larry's specific challenge. Well, I'm a people person. That's why I've been in sales when I graduated college. Even as a sales assistant, when I started, the person I was afforded to work for was on maternity leave 6 months into my job, and they gave me her sales list because I was just ready and I like to talk to people. So setting up Zoom calls is one thing, but being in person and getting to meet people and actually persuading them to buy your stuff sometimes, or just having that relationship building, that's the part I miss the most. The pivot off of that is challenging. How many times can you do a Zoom call with the same people to see how are things going in San Diego or how are they going in Colorado? It affords itself to get pretty, sort of monotone at some point. So to me, I like to think of it as I like to be out there. I like to be talking. I like to be hanging out, getting to know people. Someone once taught me that no matter who you're talking to or what you're talking to them about, you're going to move that relationship one way or the other. So make sure it's a positive impression you make on that person to move that relationship forward. And I miss that.
I do too, honestly.
It's hard. My kids are doing Zoom calls and they're doing, my son had art today at 2:00 on a Google Classroom. And it's the last thing he wants to do is draw a picture and hold it up at 7 years old. But that's sort of the reality. And, we lead by example. So if they see me and my wife on Zoom calls for our jobs, then they want to be on Google Meets and Classrooms for their calls.
And, it's affected every industry. I'm curious, what has been the most surprising result for the podcast industry as a whole?
The most surprising result. So, I think just to handle that with a challenge first is some of the content that we were creating and planning for this summer, similar to I was reading something that HBO is going through, is all the production that was being done right now for fall programming has been put to halt. So how do we pivot and still create amazing content while that backlog now is being pushed back? So from our standpoint, it's how do we figure out solutions for our customers being, the the spenders of the advertisers? And how do we at the same time also keep our publishers and our client podcast hosts happy? Some of our bigger groups I've already mentioned, like Crooked Media and Pushkin and Tenderfoot, who's creating these true crime, docuseries. How do we keep them happy with ads when the clients aren't spending? And at the same time, we have to create content, but there's no place to record and tape and do investigative journalism. So it's sort of hold tight, see what next week brings, take it one step at a time. But, I always look at, this space from radio now into podcasting as there aren't problems, there are challenges and there's always solutions. So communicating, over communicating, working together, we can figure it out. The old expression, we're not curing cancer, we're not curing the pandemic. We're just trying to survive it. Right. That's sort of where we're at right now. So it's sort of a day by day.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of how it's rolling for most of us.
What advice would you have for advertisers who are, thinking about advertising in the podcast space right now in the midst of all this?
Well, I think Apple about 2 or 3 weeks ago announced that there's over 1 million podcasts now on their provider. Now, some of them could be from 2012 and don't exist anymore, but the podcasting medium isn't going away. It's only growing. You're seeing more and more, the way Spotify's doing their deals, and Amazon is now working through Audible and their audio books and their podcast space. And Google's creating new ways to serve their podcasts. So I would say to any advertiser that's kicking the tires on jumping into the podcast space, jump in now, jump in early, jump in often. There are deals to be had now. I think someone at Air Results one told me, it might have been Russell, who said, we'll test anything at a price for the right price. So, and it's my job or our job on the sales side to figure out those solutions to the challenge and come up with how can we entice a client that's on the fence, how to come into podcasting. But now is the time, right? There's inventory available. There's great content available. People are still listening. The numbers have come all the way back. They're listening at different times in different ways. So the commuting hours are down. I mean, I save 12 and a half hours a week not commuting, but wow. I'm going for walks. I'm doing more laundry than ever before. I'm doing the dishes. And during those times, I have my headphones in or my earpiece in, and I'm listening to my pods in different ways.
So what are y'all projecting, or how are y'all projecting downloads to change as we head into Q3 and Q4?
Well, a bulk of our business is Crooked Media. So with the election looming, we're going to be doing a VP series from Crooked Media and the Pod Save America guys on Biden's selection of who his VP will be. We're going to be breaking down sort of those debates as they happen with bonus episodes. They're creating new content all the time over at Crooked Media. They've got something coming up called on the Supreme Court. They've got a Missing America show with Ben Rhodes, who's the co-host of Pod Save the World. So, for us, Q3 leading into Q4 and the election is it's going to be massive. Aside from all that, all of our other shows, we're expecting all the growth to come back and then some. We've got our Long May They Run series, which is a C13 original, which last year it's on touring bands. Last year we did Fish, and this year we're doing Dave Matthews. So we expect that to just be growing by leaps and bounds. Gangster Capitalism, our other C13 original, last year was on the admission scandal. This year we dropped it during coronavirus, and it's on the NRA and the National Rifle Association, and it's Rolling Society. So, there's great content to be had. But in talking to some, I can't tell you all the good things that are coming, but the foot is on the gas, the pedals to the metal. And we've got a lot of things coming out. Like I'd already mentioned, Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio is coming out. So there's things coming out in sports, in true crime. We've got something coming out with from Tenderfoot and the NBA on the Tim Donaghy and it's called Whistleblower on the referee scandal with the gambling. So there's really good content coming out later on in the back half of the year.
That's awesome. That's really exciting.
Yeah, you know what? It's exciting from a sales perspective too, because we've got a lot of great shows to begin with, 106 podcasts and a lot of different groups. But it's great to know that those publishers and those content providers are always looking to do better. I mean, like I said, Malcolm Gladwell starts in June, and he's the gold standard when it comes to ad reads and content. And, season 5 of Revisionist History is going to be massive.
I'm super excited for that one. I'm a huge fan of that podcast personally.
Well, 2 more I would even touch on is we did a show with the History Channel called Hope Through History with John Meacham. Just an awesome arc of storytelling where they covered polio virus, and they've covered a lot of things back the Cuban Missile Crisis and among other things. And Andrew Yang just dropped a podcast with us, which started in May, called Yang Speaks, which is delivering great numbers for us already. So, between Brene Brown, John Meacham, Andrew Yang, it's just an arsenal of just talent that we keep launching. And it's just, I feel really good about where we're at.
So can you talk a little bit about how the supply and demand of inventory is going to change, or how you kind of project it changing between now and as we get closer to the election? Because it sounds like there's a lot of content that people are really going to be tuning into around election time.
Well, so the challenge is when everybody was bailing out of March and April, we were moving a lot of that to first June and July, and then it was August and September. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the numbers, it's one, I hate to use the Trump or the Cuomo, the arc and the plateau and the curves, but our March and April took a dip, but our May came back a little bit. Our June is definitely back. But as we create new shows, our July and August are plateauing for us, and September as well. So it's going to be interesting. I think inventory is going to be tight. There's going to be demand. That's why I recommend buying in now if you could forecast that way. But I also think that the clients are going to come back, right? So all the D2C clients, all those performance-based clients that have had fulfillment centers shut down, have had workers that couldn't, meet orders, whether it be someone like a Butcher, Boxer, or Blue Apron that didn't want any new customers because they couldn't, fulfill the current customer base, or it was someone like Joybird or Rothy's or Third Love that shuts down their factories. So I think all those clients, or I hope I should say, are all going to come back in a big way, especially as we lead into the holidays. I think, as the economy comes back, the spending will come back. So if you're interested in Q3, Q4, or political inventory, now would be the time.
I think we're all expecting and hoping for a big bounce back. And I think that our clients are going to come back in leaps and bounds for sure. Well, I really wanted to thank you for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate your insight and taking the time.
Anytime for you people, for anyone at Ad Results, I'm more than happy to. It's good to see you. Hope you guys are doing well. Nathan, it's good to see you. And, if you ever need me again, I'm always available.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for updates on future episodes and leave us a comment with your feedback, questions, or ideas for future segments. If you would like more info on Ad Results Media and what we do, please visit us online at adresultsmedia.com. This podcast is an Ad Results Media production.